Hello and welcome to Fearless. This is a podcast about strength, resilience, and rising anyway. My name is Kilene Shelley, and thank you so much for being here. If you are with us, congratulations. This is our 6th episode. This episode was actually supposed to be a different topic, but this last week I heard a quote on a different podcast, and it kind of stuck with me. It's actually a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And it says, comparison is the thief of joy. And I don't even remember the podcast I was listening to, and I don't even remember who said it, but somebody said it, and it stuck with me because I feel like it was something that I was doing while we were in the hospital, and it's still something that I'm doing today. And this is a quote that I've heard many times before, and for whatever reason, it just really has stuck with me this time. And it got me thinking about where we are with Caddie's journey right now and where we kind of come from with Caddie's journey. And one of the greatest blessings that we had throughout this entire journey was the amount of families that reached out to us. Families that were going through a very similar situation to what we were, families that had already gone through a very similar situation. So there was a good range of people who were newly in this new life. So people that were like a year and under, so still in the thralls of the day-to-day grind of therapies, to parents that have made it 6, 12, 15, 20 years past it, and kids are grown and married and living life to the fullest. So just such a huge range were introduced to me. But what those conversations did was it opened me up for feelings that I really wasn't prepared to handle at the time, and still to this day have struggles with these conversations. And I'm really fine during the conversations, but it was in those quiet moments after when I would go back and I would start scrolling through their Facebook or their Instagram and looking at their journeys and kind of seeing where they came from and like what they were sharing and what I was able to kind of put together as far as the timeline was concerned, that it really became hard because I was measuring where we were in comparison to where they were at that time and at that same point of their journey. And it wasn't something that I intentionally did. It just kind of snuck up on me. But before I realized it, I was carrying this fear and, quite honestly, jealousy a lot of times about where they were in comparison to where Caddie was. I had this fear that Caddie somehow was behind the curve, like she wasn't doing everything that she should have been doing. Fear that she would never get to that next phase or to that next step where they were already at. And even though I intellectually knew that every journey, every AVM, every recovery is so different, that there's no two that will be the same, emotionally, I found myself sitting in this comparison and spiraling, feeling like just this deep pit in my stomach that I just couldn't get away from. And I became obsessed with scrolling. I was looking for any other families that I could find that could have any sort of similarities to what we were dealing with Caddie, just hoping to find something that would give me peace. Like, okay, this child is now 45 years old, made it through this AVM journey and had a very similar path to Caddie, and we're doing things at the exact same time as Caddie was. And honestly, in that moment, it's hard not to compare. Like, it's hard not to try to find similarities because there's so many unknowns. There's so many things that you're not quite aware of that in the moment, that becomes the only thing that I could really do. And I felt like this is something maybe anyone, even if you're not dealing with a trauma, could really relate to, because I feel like we do this in our normal everyday lives. Like, oh, well, their kid got straight A's and mine struggles in school, or their kid got a perfect score on their SAT and mine has to take it 5 times in order to get the score that they need to get into the college that they're interested in, or their kid got into an Ivy League college when mine's barely making it to community college. Like, whatever it may be, I feel like there's constantly comparisons that are happening. So why did I think that this season would be any different? It really wasn't. And I really did find myself grateful for what Caddie was able to do, but simultaneously I was mourning all the things that she wasn't doing yet. So even though we were thankful, like, she's awake, she's communicating, she's able to tell us what she's feeling. At the same time, I was like, she's not walking yet. She's still not using her left side. Like there were still things that were kind of hanging over us that made that transition a little bit difficult. But all these emotions kind of just were hanging on me and definitely eating away at me. And I noticed it creeping into the conversations that I would have with all these other parents. So it wasn't that anybody came at me in a nasty way, and not competitive on the surface, but I would feel this like subtle need on both sides, my side and their side, to explain or defend our child's injury. Well, my child had their AVM on this side and it affected this. Almost like we didn't want the other person to look down less on us, like, oh, well, yours wasn't as bad. Or like we were somehow behind each other. It was such a strange competition. And like to this day, I really don't understand why we went there. It's not really a competition that anyone would like sign up for. It's not really something that you wake up one morning and you're like, oh, let me compete with other parents to see whose kid had a worse injury. Like it's just a very strange thing. But there became a few conversations with parents over Messenger that I eventually had to just let lie for a while, purely for my own sanities. I feel like every family reached out with really great intentions, but the conversations would turn into things like, well, our insurance covered that part of it completely. When they would ask, like, what are you guys dealing with? And I'm like, oh, insurance has been so hard. And they're like, oh, well, our insurance covered that completely. Or we had surgery within the first week of the ICU and they were able to get their AVM out. Or he was already walking when we left the ICU. Or we already had the bone replacement surgery before they even began rehab. All amazing things, truly. And like, thankful that their child was able to have that happen. But at the same time, I would sit there and feel like we were behind because Caddie wasn't at those milestones yet. Like we were well on the floor before they were even talking about putting her bone back into her head. There were many, many weeks where it was very difficult for her to even sit up in bed. So feeling behind or that something was wrong, it sounds so silly to say it out loud. Comparing tragedies, comparing recoveries, and yet there I was feeling anxious, overwhelmed after conversations which were meant to bring me hope and comfort. And even on the hospital floor, I noticed it with kids that weren't even on the same path as Caddie. So like injuries that ranged from like flipping a go-kart to getting burned. Like there were so many different kids that were long-term kids on the floor, but yet I would find myself comparing our journey to them. And I would notice when they would be able to go home or they were able to get through rehab or they were able to do something that we weren't able to do. It would sit with me and kind of bring up this jealousy, like, oh, well, why aren't we moving along at that pace? Like, why isn't she able to go home yet? And like two totally different children, two totally different injuries, not the same path, but for whatever reason, it just stuck with me. And really, it made me think like comparison doesn't always make sense and it's not always pretty, but it does happen. It's not a space that I'm proud of. It's not something that I'm happy that I went through, but it was a space that I have been in, and honestly, one that I still visit from time to time. It's not something that goes away because I don't feel like the comparison ever really goes away. It's part of being human. It shows up in different seasons and different forms, and sometimes it takes the form of we're comparing the Caddie now to the Caddie then. Sometimes it's comparing Caddie to other kids. But I knew if I continued to let these feelings go unchecked, it wasn't healthy. So I had to stop and I asked myself, why are all these feelings showing up so strongly? And why now? Like it didn't make sense. There was enough other things for me to be worrying about than to compare my child to another sick child. And one answer that is, I think, is true for many of us, even outside of medical tragedies, is this highlight reel that we're constantly consuming, whether that's on social media or text messages. People are really quick to post all the good stuff. the progress, the milestones, all the big things that are happening, but we don't usually share all the exhaustion and the setbacks, the tears in the car, or the nights that we feel less than or that we're not making any ground. And remembering that really kind of helped me pause when comparisons started to creep in. So when I was having those conversations and parents would start down those paths, I was just able to kind of get myself in check in a little bit, because this didn't have to be a competition. This wasn't a competition. I'm sure those parents weren't coming at me like they were trying to compete with what Caddie was doing. Someone else healing faster than Caddie wasn't going to heal her any faster. And allowing resentment to grow was robbing me of really these relationships that I desperately needed. I needed these parents. I needed people in my life who understood the path that we were on and what it means to live in between all these big momentous occasions. I needed to see that there was a road forward. I needed to see people that had already traveled that road. Even if it didn't look exactly like ours, I needed to see that people got to the other side of it. And just as importantly, they deserved me to be present for their stories too, to listen to their worries, to hold space for their fears, to remind them that they weren't alone either, that Caddie was going through this as well as their child, and that I heard them and I saw their story. And then there was Caddie, and like Caddie still to this day struggles with this. I would like to say it's only something that adults deal with, but it's not. Caddie feels it too. Sometimes it comes out jokingly, with just a little bit too much truth behind it. One of the best examples I have of this happened just recently. Caddie was walking down the stairs of her therapy. So where we go to therapy now is actually on the second floor of this building, and there's this big wide staircase that you walk up to get to the therapy. And so every time we go to therapy, she walks up it, and every time we leave therapy, she walks down it. And we were walking down it, and there was this little kid, probably 5 or 6, and he was running up and down the stairs, taking 2 stairs at a time, 3 stairs at a time, hopping, jumping, just having a great time while waiting for his mom to get done upstairs. And Caddie turned to me at like the second time that he passed us, super annoyed, and said, "Well, that's really rude. They're just showing off to make me feel bad." And I laughed because it's so absurd that a 5-year-old would run up and down the stairs to make you feel bad. And in my head, I'm like, this is just a normal 6-year-old. Like, I can remember you running around, your brother running around. I'm sure he's completely unaware of you trying to concentrate to take each step without tripping or falling. But it was such a clear example of how aware she is of what she can do, what she cannot do, and what others around her seem to do so easily. It was just, it hit it home for me. One of the hardest moments, I think, with her came around a young girl who experienced a very similar injury, like very, very similar. Her AVM had ruptured earlier in the year. And so she was about 7 or 8 months ahead of us. And her recovery path looks completely different to Caddie's, like night and day. Like things that she was doing, Caddie wasn't doing. Things that Caddie was doing, she wasn't doing. Her AVM was in a different location, different surgeries, different outcomes, just completely different. And we were actually able to meet this family while we were still in the hospital. They had already left the hospital, that they came back for a visit, and they were introduced to us. And at that point, she was already walking with a cane. She was already communicating at a very high level with everybody, which was not something that Caddie was doing quite yet. So we were like on 2 totally different paths. But then we were able to meet up with them a few other times after Caddie got out of surgery. They exchanged phone numbers. They communicated a little bit. And I honestly thought they like really made a connection. They seemed to really enjoy each other. And it wasn't until we were planning to meet up with them for an event, and Caddie just really didn't seem very excited about it. And I asked her, I was like, "Hey, what's up? Aren't you looking forward to seeing her?" And Caddie was like, "No, I really I don't really want to see her. And I was shocked. I really thought having somebody that was on a similar path to her, had a similar situation to her, would make her feel a little bit of comfort and have like that person that they could kind of talk to. And she looked at me and she said, I don't like how much she talks about her AVM and how she brags about the fact that she was able to have it removed. And in that moment, I really didn't know what to say. And I'm pretty sure I just stared at her for a good period of time. And eventually I just started laughing and I made a joke because if we're really being honest, there's nobody that talks more about their AVM than Caddie. So I kind of made a quick little joke about it, but her feelings were real. And she was really comparing her journey to this little girl's journey. And even though there was honestly no bragging happening, like the little girl was not going like, nah, 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 I got my AVM removed and you didn't. Like none of that was happening. She was definitely comparing what she had gone through to what this little girl had gone through. But they ended up spending the day together and they had a really great day. And afterwards, talking with her mom, I was really reminded again that some things had gone easier for Caddie and some things had been harder for Caddie. And the same was true for her family. So comparison has been pulling our focus away from what was going right. And that was the thing. Like we all get focused on what is that other person doing that we're failing to see what we're doing. Comparison doesn't just steal your joy, it steals your presence. It keeps us from seeing the progress that's right in front of our faces. It convinces us that our story doesn't look like someone else's. It must be wrong. So for me, it was, well, if Caddie doesn't have the exact journey that these other kids have, then she's behind or she's not succeeding or she's never going to get there. But I have to remind myself that her healing process isn't linear. Growth isn't identical to anybody else, and joy doesn't exist in the same pace for everyone. So what brought us joy and excitement about her journey might bring fear to somebody else. And what has helped me and continues to help me is noticing when that comparison starts to show up, and stopping it and gently redirecting my focus back to our story and what's going right with Caddie. Really back to the present moment and what we're dealing with currently, what's right in front of our face. And it's really something that we have to remind her about, because so often we start thinking about what's happening so far in the future that we're failing to take advantage of all the things that are happening to us today. For us, it just makes more sense to focus on the good things that Caddie's doing. She's on her own journey. This isn't anyone else's journey. It's not the same as the kid that had this happen 6 months from now, and it won't be the same as a kid that might have this happen a year from now. Everyone's journey is a little bit different. And joy isn't a loud thing. It's often super quiet, kind of sits in the background. Comparison can truly drown that out if we let it. So if you're listening to this today and you're finding yourself competing in your life, with your child, your healing, your progress, please know that you're not alone. This is not a feeling that is solely yours, and you're not doing it wrong. Like your path is different than everyone else's. You're human. Your journey is exactly what it is, and it still matters. Comparison may try to steal your joy, but awareness is going to give it back to you. Thank you for being here. This is Fearless. It's a podcast about strength, resilience, and rising anyway. Until next time, stay strong.